How's it going today, everybody? This is our next review. It's going to be Elvis Presley's debut album from 1956. All right. So today we have Joseph Snyder here to help review this classic album. How you doing today, Joseph?
What's up, brother? And just another day. Like I
Hmm.
said, I'm tired.
Me too.
Running, running like that just really wears you out. Gosh.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for the weekend and for talking about Elvis. So we're ready to jump
Oh
into our
yeah.
thoughts here.
Oh yeah. We gotta jump into the king.
All right. This is our first album that we reviewed by the King. It's also the first one that was released. So released on the strength of his Sun Records singles, and then Blue Suede Shoes. We got this album. So,
hmm
and speaking of Blue Suede Shoes, that's our first song. So, how you
I
feeling
mean,
about Blue Suede Shoes?
it's a classic. I mean, Elvis. He was one of those guys. He did a lot of singles before he did an album, but not very many people had albums back in '56.
Yeah,
So, it was if you were big, like if you were a big shot, then you got an album. But this
albums.
is like right after the Sun Studios time. Um, and let's see, he did this, he did That's All Right, Mama, which that's not even his song, but we'll go into that another day. Um, I feel like there was one more he did before he did this album. Was this before Hound Dog? No, this wasn't before Hound Dog.
Okay.
So, but overall, Blue Suede Shoes. I mean, it's a classic. It's a classic. Everyone knows the song. Everyone moves and grooves to it. It's a good little party song.
Yeah, I know back in the day, albums weren't exactly like what we would think of them now. They were more, they would put one or two singles on them and then they'd have them record like some extra tracks just so that they could put out something longer.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this album compared to nowadays, most albums nowadays are like an hour and a half. This one's only half an hour.
It
I
was a
think it's like, let's see.
pretty good listen, especially for the time.
It says here on my Spotify, it's 28 minutes and 19 seconds with 12 songs. How many songs do you see released on albums nowadays? Probably close to 24, something like that.
Yeah, depends on the album. Some of them are less than 12, but it's longer because they have like 5 minute songs as opposed to 2.5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, most of these songs didn't last beyond 2 minutes.
And that's kind of good because they always leave you wanting more rather than overstaying their welcome.
Well, that and some of them are also just fun little ditties.
Yeah.
Like Blue Suede Shoes is a prime example of that. It's just a fun little song. I mean, it's about being territorial,
Yeah.
but other than that, I mean, if you don't think about it too much, it's just a fun little song to get down to.
For me, Blue Suede Shoes is the perfect opening track for Elvis's debut album. I really like the guitar on it. It gets you rocking and rolling.
Yeah, it's very exemplary of the era.
Yeah.
The '50s when, in a way, the '50s was like the start of R&B music, which I will get to that on a later track. Um, and rock and roll today.
Yes. Yeah, and listen to this. This is kind of the beginning of rock and roll, this album here. Like
Mhm.
this is the one that changed everything.
It changed. I'll give you that. It's not the start, but it changed everything.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some others before, but this is kind of the big game changer.
Oh
Uh
yeah.
Moving on to our second track, I'm Counting on You. What do you feel about this one?
This one's a good one as well. I mean, there are no bad songs from the King. I'll say that.
Yeah.
There are no bad songs. But this is not one that I typically think of when I think of his early days or him in general. This isn't really one of those ones that I typically think of, but going back and listening to it again, I mean, it's a good one. Uh, it's common with most songs of the era where it's about women, about being with a girl.
Yeah.
That's how many songs from the '50s and '60s are about that.
Probably all of them.
A lot of them, at least into the late 60s.
Yeah.
But, you know, staple of the era sort of thing, I guess. But the only thing that can't be denied is that his voice fits the song perfectly.
Yeah. I have put down that it's a good ballad and I like the piano.
That is true. The piano does get underplayed a lot in Elvis's early stuff,
Yeah.
which is funny compared to his later stuff, which is all horns and
Yeah.
symphony.
His early stuff is like, you got like bass, guitar, drums, and piano. And
Pretty
then,
much.
like, if you compare something like Blue Suede Shoes to, say, Suspicious Minds, it's got all that overblown orchestral, which I like that, but like it's very different than this early stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, at that point in time, and we'll probably touch on that if we get to those later albums someday, but that was past like the experimentation period of rock and roll. Like the
Mm.
60s was when everyone was experimenting with it.
All right. Our third track is I Got a Woman, which is a cover of the song by Ray Charles.
Another great one, of course, like you mentioned, it's a cover of Ray Charles. There's a lot of covers on this. But most people, that's how they get started, if you think about it. A lot of people do
Especially in the
covers of
50s.
songs. Yeah, especially in the 50s. I mean, like for example, when the Beatles started
Half
as
of their songs were covers when they
yeah, I was
started.
gonna say, even as the Quarrymen, like I think they covered oh
I
God,
know
what was
Twist
it?
and Shout is probably one of their more famous covers.
That is a cover song. I forget who was, but was that
Isley Brothers, I think.
Isley Brothers? Okay, for some reason I was thinking that it was Fats Domino for some reason.
Oh, no. They covered a few Little
But
Richard songs as well, the Beatles,
that's true. A lot of people covered Little Richard,
including Elvis,
which
but we'll get to that later.
we'll get to that later. We need to cover Little Richard.
Yeah. What? Anyway, I like this. I like the cover. I'm gonna have to go with Ray Charles a little bit better, but Elvis still makes this song his own.
I mean, they're kind of different in terms of how they're played. So
Yeah,
it's kind of like picking apples and oranges in a way.
exactly.
I mean, I am biased towards the King. So I mean, he Elvis is my favorite artist, musician, whatever you want to label him as. I won't label him as a band because
No.
I guess the way I would label him is he's the greatest performer to have ever lived. And
Yeah.
so he will always be my favorite. And so I got to go with his version. If we're
Mm.
comparing, we should compare versions of songs. That's just
That would be
another
good.
video
Like
idea I
a
just had.
battle between different. Yeah, that would be great.
That would be good. We'll save that for another day.
We will. Moving on, we got One Sided Love Affair.
Again, it's another good song. There are no bad songs on this, but this again is another one of those songs, kind of like I'm Counting on You. I don't necessarily think of it all the time when
Mm.
you ask me what are some of his greatest songs from early on in his career. Um, but overall, you know, it's it speaks pretty true even nowadays if you think about it
Yeah.
for a lot of people, which I think it's probably the most realistic song on the album in
Yes.
terms of comparing it, to the real world and scenarios.
Yeah. A lot of these 50s, 60s songs have very like over romanticized views, and this one is kind of more real. Like, I
Yeah,
like you, but you don't like me. So, like, what am I doing here?
yeah, exactly. It could be the original emo song if you want to say.
In my notes, I put that this is classic 50s rock and roll.
Pretty
And that's one of
much.
the things I noticed about this album is that it's kind of split halfway between ballads and rockers.
Yeah, that's how a lot of guys started to be around this era because the ballads really came around at the swing of the 60s.
Yeah.
And so let's say I think it really started probably, let's say 58 till the 60s. And the 60s was when they went all in on
So
ballads.
Elvis was doing it before it was cool.
Elvis was doing a lot of things before it was cool, man. I mean, wearing
He made it
pink
cool.
and all that. Oh, shoot. I should have worn my pink t shirt for this because he's wearing his pink suit jacket on the album cover.
Yeah.
It's in black and white, but
Speaking of the
that's the
album
pink.
cover, like that's one of the famous images in rock and roll. That picture of him on the front with like, and it says Elvis Presley on the front.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, let me look at it real quick. I think this is uh, from when he played in that festival that they portrayed in the movie, Kentucky, the
Oh,
Kentucky
yeah.
Wagon or something like that.
Yeah.
That festival that they went over, because he played a lot of festivals and a lot of like state fairs and all that early on in his career before he got big and before he met the Colonel. But I think this is the one that they portrayed in the movie actually when he
Hmm.
played when they had Austin Butler sing Let's Play House.
Yeah.
You know, because I think that's the same jacket and the same outfit that he wore. Plus, the
Hmm.
background looks just like a stage.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, this
And,
one is good. Our next song is I Love You Because.
uh, precursor to Things That Lie Ahead, this is the best song on the album.
Mm,
This is the best song on the album. And I think that this is young Elvis at his greatest in terms of his vocalization and um, and in terms of just his singing performance in general. Like he's not going really high pitch like he does on some other songs, but one of the things that Elvis did better than most people is you can feel the raw
yeah.
emotion coming from his voice. And sometimes his vocal cords are cracking. You don't even care because you know that he is feeling what the song is portraying. And, you know, this, and he did that a lot later in his career, but this you could see as like a precursor of things to come in terms of that raw emotion.
Definitely a
Yeah.
precursor. I can hear a little bit of Love Me Tender or like Are You Lonesome Tonight in this song.
Uh, yeah, I would say probably more so a precursor to songs like later on in his career when he did the song "Hurt" or "You Don't Have to Say You Love Me."
Mm,
But even then, like this song, it can be taken a lot of ways if you think about it. Like obviously, it's about a girl,
yeah.
about some love in his life. But if you think about it, even though it doesn't explicitly say it, you can turn it into other things. Like, for example, it could be a love for your family.
Hmm.
You know, like
Yeah.
for me, when I hear the song, the first thing that I think of is my grandma.
Mm,
You know, like a lot of the words in the song just resonate with me just because of how much I know that she loves me. And let's see, what's the chorus? Like the main line of the chorus is I love you because you're you. And that sounds a lot like a lot of things my grandma has told me in my
mm,
life growing up. So that's just how I think of it. Obviously it's about a girl that he would be in a relationship with,
yeah.
but it could take on different meanings just because they don't specifically say things like, oh, I want to go dancing with you, honey, or something like that. You know.
I put in my notes that I liked the whistling at the beginning. It was
That is
very
an interesting thing.
atmospheric.
Yeah, that is interesting. There are other songs that show that sort of atmospheric aspect later on. Uh, yeah, later on in the album. I was looking at the track list.
Mm, yes. Our next track is Just Because.
Another standard girl song, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
This one I kind of put mid tier in terms of, yeah, I think of Elvis with this song, but at the same time, I think of other songs before this one. But, you know, this seems kind of like one of those songs of, let's say, the girl who left you, you
Mm,
know?
yeah.
It's like you think you're all this, but you're not. One of those sort of diss tracks. See, Elvis was doing diss tracks before rappers came along.
Elvis.
So
Okay, so I guess what John Lennon said was true. Before Elvis, there was nothing.
I wouldn't say that. But if it wasn't for Elvis, a lot of things wouldn't have become mainstream, I would say,
Yeah.
just because of who he was and how big he became.
Yeah.
You know, we could do a whole podcast episode just talking about the legacy of the king,
Yeah.
which that's another idea that we could totally do is talk about someone's legacy
I'm gonna have to
as
write
like
down all
just
these great ideas.
we are gonna have to do that.
Legacy, cover versus original.
Yeah, there's some interesting ones we could do for that. Anyway, but uh but yeah, just one of those sort of, I'm gonna say an OG diss track. That's what this is.
Yeah.
And you know what? It puts you in a good mood when you hear it too.
For me, I put the big standout on this song was the percussion and the rhythms.
True. Yeah, this one has a lot more drum to it than most of the other ones.
And of course his vocals, because he's killing it on all these songs.
Well, yeah, he's Elvis Presley.
All right, flip the record over, and the first song on the second side is Tutti Frutti. Oh,
Cover of Little Richard,
Little Richard.
which, I mean, for people who don't know who Little Richard is, like let's say, for example, someone in our audience does not know who Little Richard is. What's your problem? Go and listen to Little Richard. That man will rock your socks off.
Another one of the
Him
pioneers
get
of
down.
rock and roll.
Yeah, he was one of the pioneers. He was before Elvis got big, man. I mean, he was like, he was in the era when like BB King was starting to get his feet off the ground and all that, even though BB King was more blues. But Little Richard is still one of those guys. If you want to talk about rock and roll, you cannot discredit Little Richard.
Yeah.
You know, he made songs like this one, Tutti Frutti. I know this is an episode about Elvis, but I'm gonna talk about Little Richard for a sec.
That's all right.
Like Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally.
Mm.
I'm blanking right now just because I'm really thinking about Little Richard and just
Making sure you say it right.
I know, yeah. I just want to make sure I say it right. But like the energy, he's the one who kind of brought energy to rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know,
Getting
and
up
a
on
little
stage with the piano, just going like,
yeah, he would play it with his foot. He'd play it with his foot, man. And he also started to bring a little bit of that flamboyancy into rock and roll as well. You know, he wore the bright colors on stage. He's the first one to wear eyeliner as well. You know, most people would have looked down on that, and they did, of course. But Little Richard did it first, then Elvis did it, and there's probably some people in between with the late 50s and the early 60s, probably.
But then Bowie.
Then Bowie. I feel like Jagger might have done it at one point in his career. Did Jagger come? Yeah, Jagger came before Bowie.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's go Little Richard, then Elvis, then Jagger, then Bowie. We'll just say that for like the big ones.
Yeah.
You know. So I mean, just a big old pioneer of it. And the fact that Elvis played one of his songs, and as portrayed in the movie, and I did look it up as well, that Elvis and Little Richard did hang out a little bit there on Beale Street. Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
like a lot of those guys, the pioneers of rock and roll, they knew each other, and they all kind of hung out a little bit because rock and roll, it originated from like what we think of as old school country music. It's like a mix of country music, gospel music, what we would now call soul, depending on who's writing it, and then the beginnings of R&B, which originated from blues as well. So there's just a lot that went into rock and roll, and that's why you can't pin rock and roll down to just one style. You know, you have like hard rock, and then you have metal nowadays, and then you've also got classic rock like this, or you've got rockabilly style like early Elvis stuff and Chuck Berry. You know, we're making this really into a rock and roll track, I guess, rather than
that's okay track. because of how big this album was in the history of rock. That really works out with the video. Yeah.
And I will say, in terms of Elvis's performance, okay, this is the one track that I'll say Little Richard is better than Elvis.
Yeah.
This is the one time I'll say it, but that's just because it's Little Richard.
Yeah.
I mean, he just had an energy that Elvis couldn't really do. I'm going to say it's just because Elvis was white. I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
Like
his whiteness dragged him down.
His whiteness held him back from exuding all that energy. You know,
that's one of the things that I get upset about is some people say that like Elvis just stole his music from black people, which honestly, like that can't be further from the truth after especially like watching the music and seeing him grow up in the black church. And then like, it's not that he stole it. It's just because he had the utmost inspiration for all that music.
I mean, if you grow up around something or a certain culture, you're going to be influenced by it a lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think the way how Elvis would do these songs, I think is more so paying tribute to his friends.
Mm,
Just
yeah.
because, like I said, him and Little Richard, they were friends. Uh, I don't know if he knew Ray Charles or not,
Mm,
but I'm sure that Ray Charles, since he covered one of his songs, I'm sure he was influenced by Ray Charles a little bit with
yeah.
songs like "Hit the Road, Jack."
With
Uh,
everybody in the 50s, it's in some way inspired by Ray Charles.
yeah, exactly. He was just one of those pioneers.
So, man, we spent a lot of time talking about Tutti Frutti
Yeah,
and
we did.
went on a little rock history there.
I mean,
Try
wop bop a loo wop bop bam boom.
Tutti Frutti. All right, trying to get to you.
Great one. I honestly like the version from the '68 comeback special better.
Mm,
But I will say the one thing that this version does better than that one is I'm going to say his boyish voice really does well on this one because I think when they made this album, he was the same age as me. I think he was
oh wow,
22. I think so because
that's
he
crazy.
started. I know he started in his early 20s, and then he had a big old 21, 22 year career, and
Wow.
then something like that because he was 43, 44 when he passed away.
Mm,
So he had a 20 plus career with that little gap when he went into the army,
mm,
you know. But this is one of those ones the girls went crazy for.
yeah.
This would have been like comparing it to, let's say, a decade ago. This would have been the equivalent to a Justin Bieber song, if you think about it. And so, like our grandparents, like our grandmas.
Oh, I think you got muted somehow. Okay,
All right, I got you again.
there we
Cool.
go. All right, you're back.
But
And
yeah, and then imagine our great grandparents with a song like this too, or just Elvis in general. Imagine their reactions.
yeah.
I I've heard stories, man. From my grandma, who she's the one who got me into Elvis in the first place. I've heard stories about like how her dad hated him. Her dad thought he was ruining music. Her dad thought same thing with the Beatles as well.
Jeremy, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because he's sick right now, he did send us his favorite songs in his ranking though. But he says that his grandma, or I was somebody, told him a story that whenever she was little, went out and bought Chuck Berry's My Little Ding-a-Ling record, and that her mom came in, played it, and was like, "What is this crap?" And basically like broke the record.
Well, yeah, because this is the start of the era that America was still very much you go to, and I'm not saying don't do it, but very much go to church on Sunday. Uh, God bless America.
Well,
Really more so religious
there's
than
such a
the
thing
country is
as
now.
too strict.
Yeah, too strict. And I think part of it is just because they didn't understand or they didn't really
Yeah.
give it a chance, you know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
kind of like with my parents' generation, for example, with rap music,
Mm,
it's kind of the same thing. Now there's some of it, yeah, it's garbage, but there's a lot of it that's really good, you know? Like for example, I love Ice Cube and I love 50 Cent,
mm,
you know. But do my folks? No. Oh, my mom probably does. But, you know, it's just a generational thing, I think,
yeah.
you know. And let's not forget that our grandparents lived through the generation saying rock and roll is the devil or communicates with the devil if you play it backwards.
That's all. I think that's all just coincidental.
Eh, I don't know. I feel like it was like it's kind of like, the metaphor you start as a molehill and then you can grow into a mountain.
Yes.
I feel like the molehill started in this generation here with the 50s
Yeah.
and 60s. And then by the time the 70s and 80s hit, then it became a mountain, especially in the 70s,
Mm,
you know. But that's only just talking with my parents about music from their times and how their parents thought of all of it and what they thought of it, their lives growing up.
yeah. I put for trying to get to you. I put it's slower, but it still rocks.
Oh yeah, especially especially that little guitar solo they've got in it.
Yeah. And I put that his vocals really shine on this one.
Yes, again, his boyish vocals here just really, really enhance the song. I'll say
All right. I'm going to sit right down and cry.
breakup song, typical breakup song,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have the tone of a breakup song. It's more fast paced than a usual breakup song. Like most breakup songs, still to this day, you think of slow and somber, almost like a country western song, you know, or even if it's not in that country western beat, you know, just something like a soft melodic piano, you know, you think of
Yeah.
something little. But this one, it's a little more fast paced. It's a little more rock.
Yeah. I put that it's upbeat and catchy, and I really liked the guitar on this one.
I find that kind of ironic. There's a couple of songs that Elvis has on this album that's talking about the negative side of a situation, like a breakup or someone leaving you. And him and his guys, they made an upbeat song,
Hmm.
you know. Now I know, of course, Elvis didn't write his own songs. We know
Yeah.
that. You know, he had a writer, and then he had his guys with him to help enhance the musical portion of it. But either way, I think that's interesting that they took a negative and flipped it on its head in a way.
Mm. After that, we've got "I'll Never Let You Go," which is another ballad.
Another ballad, yeah. Excuse me.
For me, I liked the guitar on this one. There was a really cool slapback echo on his voice that I thought was cool. And then I like how it changes to be faster halfway through the song.
Yeah, there's a lot of songs that did that actually. Like they just pick up the pace a little bit,
Yeah.
or change keys. This one kind of showed that influence from Western music in a way, you know,
Mm,
country music,
yeah.
which I mean that makes sense given that Elvis grew up in the South, you know. Um, and also just people of that era as well. Like I'm gonna go back to Little Richard again. Man,
Mm,
Little Richard just he was so fast paced. He was probably the fastest one back in this era.
yeah.
You know. Again, I don't really have too much to say about this one, just because I just don't typically think of this one.
Sometimes the songs that you don't have much to say about are the ones you like the most.
Yeah, it all depends on the sense.
Mm. All right. After that, we have "Blue Moon."
I really like the vocals on this one because it sounds haunting, you
Yeah.
know, and that's something that I've expressed on the past couple episodes. I enjoy that vibe. This is the one Elvis song that I would think could be played in some sort of monster movie, let's say.
Mm,
And, you know, when I was reading the track list, for some reason, I was thinking, and it's probably because I've heard the other song more, I was thinking that it was Blue Moon of Kentucky,
uh,
but it wasn't. But honestly, I like this one a little better. Um, kind of a song about just missing your loved one, you know, like
mhm,
missing a girl, but missing your loved one just in general.
mm. Yeah, I put that it's all about the vocals on this one, and his
Hmm.
falsetto voice whenever he goes up really high was really cool.
This was like the prime era for his high vocals, his high pitch.
Yeah. And then we get to our last song, "Money Honey."
I think this one's another cover, is it not?
I think so.
There was a lot of songs to do with money back then.
Yeah. I'd put that
But
Elvis is going to give us one last rocker before he closes the album.
oh, of course. Like I said, I feel like this was the cover, but also again the echoes of his voice shine through on this one.
Mm,
You know, uh, yeah, just there was a big theme in this era with girls and money and a lot of things
yeah.
that we still think about nowadays. You know, and so I always find it funny hearing those kind of songs of like, oh, all I want is the money, and so I dropped my ring. Uh, but it's like all I want is the money. It's like Tom Cruise in
Show me
oh
the
gosh, I
money.
forgot that money. I forgot that movie, but yeah,
Jerry
show me the
Maguire.
money. Jerry Maguire, thank you. Gosh, I don't watch Tom Cruise movies enough. Yeah. Good little rockin' beat to it, of course. Um, and it's of course it flips the somber tone of the other two songs on its
Yeah.
head, which is a good thing, and it's a good way to close out the album.
So Jeremy sent in his favorite songs were Blue Suede Shoes and I Got a Woman, and he gives it a 7 out of 10.
Wow, 7. Okay.
Jeremy is a very
He
very
is very
strict
picky.
grader.
Oh,
Uh,
I know. I
he
know he
gave
is.
he gave Moving Pictures by Rush a 7 out of 10.
I haven't listened to that, so I don't know if I
Oh,
agree
we
with him
might
on
have
that.
to redo that one because it's really good.
Okay.
But
Uh, yeah.
my favorite songs, going through the list: Blue Suede Shoes, I Got a Woman, um, Trying to Get to You, Blue Moon, and Money Honey. And I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10.
I gotta say, for mine, going from the bottom to the top, Blue Moon would be my number 5 pick, just because it is different. It's got that haunting vocals, and it's a good song. Uh, Above that would be Money Honey, just because it gets that basic rock and roll feel again. Number 3, just because I feel obligated to put this on the list somewhere, is Blue Suede Shoes. It is one of these songs that made him famous, after
Mm,
all. So, if not the song that made him famous. So, I feel like it has to go at least at the number 3 spot. Number 2 would be I Got a Woman. But again, I feel like the 68 comeback special version's better. Just,
mm,
I feel like it's probably because he got older.
yeah.
And then number 1 would be I Love You Because, just because that song has sentimental value to me. And it always makes me think of my grandmother.
Mm,
And also Elvis's vocals on it are just
yeah.
superb. And I agree with you. It's an 8 out of 10. It's a solid start to a very more than solid
Yes.
career
Um,
that gave us the legacy and the legend known as Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll.
I gave it an 8 out of 10, but I'll say a higher 8 out of 10 than Kate Bush, which was still a good album, but I think this one was maybe a little bit better just because I'm a bigger fan of Elvis.
I'm a bigger fan of Elvis. What did I give Kate Bush? Did I give it like an
I
eight and
think
a
all three
half?
of us gave it an 8 out of 10.
That's right. That's right. Um, I will say this one is more my vibe than a Kate Bush thing. If I give something the same ranking, I'm not gonna say, "Oh, this one could be an 8.1 and all that." No, I'm not that person. If I say something's an 8, it's gonna stay at an 8. But it's all a matter of personal preference, which one I like better. And
Yeah.
so I will say I like this one better than the Kate Bush one, just because I'm a bigger Elvis fan and I'm a bigger rock and roll fan. But overall, like I said, this is a great album.
All right. So that'll do it for today. Be sure to join us again next week whenever Jeremy's back. We're going to have some discussion on what we're going to be reviewing next week, and we will see you later.
Get well soon, Jeremy. Take care, guys.